Hello and welcome to Waly Gisnep's Animated Classic, the podcast where we take a look at various animated films, no longer just from the Disney animated classics, to see which ones truly hold up to that title of an animated classic, regardless of where they come from, albeit in our case, we're looking for a Waly Gisnep animated classic. As always, I am Liam and I'm joined by my very good friend Ben. Ben, which film is up for consideration this time?
This week, Liam, we're going with our second Don Bluth film, 1986's An American Tail, produced by none other than Steven Spielberg himself. As always, we'll give our own personal history and reflections on this film, go through a beat by beat of the plot, decide who the sexiest character is in the film before finally deciding whether we think it's a true classic and has earned a place on the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. So Liam, what's your history with this film?
This is a film that I watched quite a lot as a very small child, and watching it, there were lots of moments of animation which just brought up very deep buried memories, and I'm like, I've definitely seen this and this is so clear in my mind. That said, until today when I watched it, I couldn't tell you what it was about.
Well, in some ways I'm very different to you, Liam, because this is my first time watching this film. Can I tell you what it's about? Well, we shall get to that.
Before we launch into our rundown of the film, I just wanted to say I've got a game for you, Ben, because when I watched this film...
Is the game Kingdom Hearts?
It's not. This is one of the few characters that doesn't actually make it into Kingdom Hearts, mostly by virtue of not being Disney, though frankly, I don't think that's going to be an issue moving forward now that Disney owns basically everything. But when I was watching this film, I was watching it with a friend of mine who had never seen it. They were like, oh, I know that film. That's a beloved film. Many people have fond memories of it, but I've never seen it. I'll watch it with you. And we got to a point where they said, I can't take this anymore. You have to turn it off and watch it by yourself later. Now, that is not an indictment of my opinion of the film. That is very much their opinion of the film. However, my game for you, Ben, is, as we're discussing this film, I want you to tell me the exact moment that happened, because I think you're probably going to know what it is. And if you do so, I'll give you 10 bonus points.
Excellent. I've got to accrue those bonus points after poor performance in Laputa Castle in the Sky. I've got two ideas, Liam. One of them I'll save for when we get to it. The first is right at the start of the film, when it's the opening credits and the name Don Deluise appears. Is it that point?
No, but luckily there's not much Dom DeLuise in this film. There's less of him than there was in Oliver and Company, but also less of him than there is in every Don Bluth film coming up. In the same way that Pixar has John Ratzenberger, I very much feel that Don Bluth picked Dom DeLuise of all people, which is a bizarre choice. And if you are not on board with his wheezing laugh, my God, you're not going to enjoy many of the Don Bluth films coming up.
So yeah, after we get through the credits, one thing I was thinking, by the way, is these credits are about 2 minutes long and they are white text on a black background for the most part. And they are the kind of credits which, if I had owned this film on VHS growing up, I would have mastered fast-forwarding through them.
Can I just say, I forgot how painful it was having the credits at the start of a film. We got past this ages ago in this podcast. Once we got to, it was like The Little Mermaid or something, I think, that just sort of, we transitioned and we never had to deal with it again. But jumping back to the 80s, oh boy, we're back to pre-roll credits. Aren't they wonderful?
I'm pretty sure they do it in Toy Story. Come on, guys.
To be fair, I think in Toy Story they were worried that like people were going to get scared by like when people saw the train in the first like recorded footage and ran out of cinema, they were like, the toys are alive, it's so realistic. So get the credits in early so everyone gets their acknowledgements.
So the people who've gone to the cinema to watch a film, there's a risk they would immediately forget they're in a cinema and think they are watching real toys that they don't own, but somehow have convinced themselves that they own and have come to life.
Yes.
Yes. No, I think that makes perfect sense. The only other thing that jumps out to me, I can't believe I've got so much to say about the credits, is the score of this film is done by James Horner, which is a name I was like, I recognise that name, but I'm not sure why. I'm like, oh, they did the score for Titanic, and a bunch of other very, very famous films. They just finished doing Aliens.
Yeah, that jumped out to me. I mean, that's what you get when your film is produced by Steven Spielberg, isn't it? I mean, he tried to get John Williams, but John Williams was like, no, that's just a true story. So after our credits, we open on a very Christmassy image, and it's revealed that we're in Russia. And immediately I was like, oh, Russia. That's odd, because this was obviously the era of the Soviet Union. And then I realised, no, this is set in the past as well. I was wondering, it took me a second for my brain to be like, wait a minute, it wasn't called Russia. Oh, wait. Yes, it was. I'm not following. Could have done with a year, is what I'm saying. They could have been like, Russia, 1884.
There is a pop-up that says Russia 1885.
Oh, well, I mean, at this point, I think I was so numb to text that I just stopped reading.
It's a very festive season. The Mouskovitz family are celebrating Hanukkah. Already, this is a weird element of the film, which I feel starts quite strongly in that these characters are very clearly meant to be Jewish, right? They celebrate Hanukkah, a lot of elements of their names and languages and culture. There's a Jewish element to them. I feel it gets dropped quite early on in the film, but I think it's established fairly well at the start here.
If I had sort of one early criticism of this film, it's that I don't know whether they were afraid to make this such a Jewish film, like to have it so front and center that they just drop it, because they do it so well in the opening. And then actually, I think, so what ends up happening, we're introduced to the Mouskovitz family, and where they live is attacked by cats, but really it's the cats that come with, is it Cossacks, is it? I'm not quite sure. But here's the thing is, it's not super spelled out, but the point is this is an anti-Semitic attack on a Jewish settlement. And it's done not in a particularly laboured way. It's enough that if you're aware of the history, you can see it. And also, if you're not, it's just a very upsetting scene. But also, it would have been nice also if that, like, okay, what is happening here? This might be a good chance to, educate young viewers about this. Because it sort of sets the film up as being that mice are not an allegory, but a kind of stand-in for Jewish people in Europe, and they are escaping cats as a stand-in for anti-Semitism by going to America. And I think that is really well set up. And then, as you say, it's just kind of dropped.
It's a real shame. So as part of the Hanukkah celebrations, we're introduced to the Mouskovitz family. So we have Ma and Pa, our protagonist Fievel, his sister Tanya, and a baby who is in the first few scenes, but apparently due to production limitations later on in production, isn't in any of the later scenes because they didn't bother animating her. So there you go.
There's a moment later where they're arriving at immigration and they're declaring how many of them there are. And I was like, wait, that number's wrong. And it was because I forgot about the baby.
Well, so did everybody else, both in and out of the film.
There's a nice moment in the Hanukkah celebrations, which it's so sweet from the perspectives of the mice, but talking about from the people world, it's just horrifying, which is they're talking about how great America is and their version of it being a land of opportunity. And the things they say is there's a mouse hole in every wall, and there's breadcrumbs on every floor. And I'm like, America sounds horrible.
But whilst it sounds horrible to humans, it clearly appears to the mice because, a land without cats is what they want. Pa keeps saying there's no cats in America, and obviously they have pretensions of going to America. I know children obviously can pick up accents very quickly, a lot quicker than adults pick them up. Fievel and his sister, in fact, pick theirs up so quickly, they pick it up before they've even arrived in America. They've got American accents, which I think is very, very forward-thinking of them.
I will take that over this child actor trying to do a Russian accent.
I'd take a lot of things over this child actor trying to do anything.
Right, we may as well get this segment over and done with. This is not a child actor I am a fan of. I said in our We're Back discussion that I've realised I'm not a fan of child protagonists, and I think this is just another reason I never want to see a young child protagonist, is because of the insistence on trying to get young child actors as well. The best child actor in the world is still not a good actor. I don't care. It's like, have I told you about when I went to watch The Lion King? So if you've never been to watch a West End or Broadway show, The way the child actors work is because obviously, they've got schoolwork, they can't be doing this every day. You usually get about 3 or 4 actors playing each of the roles, and like one night will be one, another night will be another. And when I went to watch it, the Simba was the young Simba. The adult Simba was great. The young Simba was just awful. And okay, they're 10 or 11. I'm not expecting them to be great, but also like this was a West End production. Is this the best we can find? And what made it worse is the Nala was incredible.
Which just goes to show you can have good performances from children.
I realise I have just contradicted myself, yeah. Child actors are universally awful, except for that one Nala.
They should have got that Nala. Admittedly, she'd not been born and it wouldn't be for another 25 years, but damn it. I don't think it's fair to ever put it at the child's door, right? Children...
Oh, I do.
Well, no, but I think it's the fault of the casting director and the voice director, because that's how you get the right actor and you get the right performance out of them. And if those two people aren't doing a good job, you end up with something like you get in An American Tail. It's not fair to say it ruins the film, but it really causes a lot of harm, because there's no emotional weight to almost anything Fievel says, which is really jarring. I genuinely think the film would have been better if they'd gone down the Dumbo route and had a mute protagonist, because Fievel's a very young character. I don't know how old Fievel's meant to be, but he seems to be about 6 or 7, maybe a little bit older, maybe 8 or 9. He seems like a very young character. I think having that character be mute and just kind of reacting to the things visually would have suited the animation style more, and it also would have suited the character more, especially since most of the time all Fievel's saying is, "Papa, I'm looking for my family," something along those lines. He doesn't have some great interesting dialogue, and things just happen to him. A lot of what happens to Fievel is just him bouncing around and getting blown all over the place. So you may as well have the character be mute. I think it would have made the character a lot more likeable. I
think it also would have made the narrative a lot more focused, because you can't rely on, I suppose, the dialogue from the protagonist, so it's got to be a more focused narrative.
And I think it suits the theme as well, because a lot of this film is about Fievel finding his identity, or I think that's what it's meant to be about. We can talk about theme in a bit. But, you know, a young immigrant without a family has lost his... So he's in a new land without his family. He's lost his identity. So him being silent, maybe have him silent after an event that happens very shortly, where it'd be a traumatic event, and until he's reunited with his family and reunited identity, he's literally lost his voice as well as figuratively losing it.
I will say this about Fievel, though. The character design is adorable.
I think this is the point where I'm meant to agree, but I don't find him very cute.
Oh no, that pause was waiting for you to agree. I find his little face with his big ears, you know, a mouse. And his big hat and his oversized jacket. It's just a red shirt, I suppose. I think he's really endearingly cute, other than how young he is.
I think he'd be a lot cuter if he didn't talk.
God, imagine Dumbo, if they had Dumbo voiced by a small child.
I haven't seen the live-action remake, and I know this isn't the case, but in my head, he's voiced by Danny DeVito in the live-action version. One more thing on the voice acting, and I promise we can finally move forward with the plot. I think this film suffers from the same problem The Secret of NIMH does.
It's directed by Don Bluth.
Maybe? It's something I find really hard to put my finger on, and if you watch this film, maybe you'll understand what I mean, or just watch a clip of it. Every scene, like the particularly dialogue-heavy scenes, they feel just weird, and it's really hard to put my finger on it. I think it's a combination of a couple of things. I think the sound mixing is bad. I think often like the dialogue isn't at the right volume. I thought at first the voice direction was weird, but what I think it is the voice direction is telling people for the most part to be quite naturalistic. Certainly the sort of non-villainous or big side comedy characters, they are over the top, but your sort of core characters are quite naturalistic, but the animation style and visually what we're seeing is really energetic and over the top, and that's really, really jarring. I think that's what the cause is. I don't know, there's just a weird feeling about all the conversation in this film that I find hard to pin, because I don't think it's intrinsically voice performances or the writing. It seems to be something more abstract than that.
My impression is that Don Bluth is first and foremost an animator and wants to tell stories visually, and just isn't super comfortable directing a project that involves dialogue and narrative. I think that a lot of the dialogue that happens, and frankly a lot of the things that happen, are just because that's what happens next. Like this, for example, there's an attack on the village and it's very dramatic. Visually, it's amazing. and they're like, their home is destroyed. They have to go to America, like they've been talking about, and now they just have to go. Suddenly, we're in Hamburg, and I get it. You don't have to show every part of the journey, but it's just like, well, they've decided to go to America. Now they're off to America. I don't know. It feels like there's pieces missing and there's a beat missing.
So, from what I've read, this is an example of where there were pieces missing. I referenced the baby being dropped later on in the film because just for production reasons. This section of them travelling across Europe was cut. There's lots of scenes that were apparently cut or songs that were cut, and you can really tell. I think you're absolutely right. It feels very jarring, and often what they had to do is put in much shorter scenes to plug the gaps, and it does make things very jarring, and often just things feel a bit pointless and undercooked. So yeah, I agree. This is a prime example of, hey, maybe we should go to America. Cut. Right, we're going to America.
So they're off to America. They're boarding this steamboat, just a big steamer boat. I don't know. It's a boat. And my first thought from this scene is traveling with children looks like a nightmare.
Especially if the rule is, if everyone isn't walking, the band will refuse to play and get furious.
And now we're en route to America. The Mouskowitzes are excited but nervous. They're talking about this land of opportunity. And again, they come back to this No Cats in America, which leads us to our first big musical number of the film. And in the same way that we've gone back to credits being before the film and it being me forgetting just how awful that was, we've gone back to musical numbers before The Little Mermaid, and I'd forgotten how awful they can be.
Yeah, it's not great, and I don't think it's anything more simple than I don't think any of the songs are any good.
Yeah, to me it's a combination of, I'd say that the song's quite catchy. It's not good, but it gets stuck in your head. There are no cats in America, just over and over again. But visually, it's just a very dull and flat sequence.
Yeah, there's a little bit of promise, and you feel it's going to build, because the idea is different mice are different national stereotypes as mice are relaying their experiences of having people they know killed by cats. Which again, if we're taking it as that analogy of sort of anti-Semitism, or maybe more broadly sort of oppression towards minorities and immigrants, it's quite a powerful idea, and the cargo hold warps and changes around them to kind of reflect their country of origin. But it doesn't build to anything.
I think it's something that they only really nailed after Howard Ashman showed animation studios how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. You start small and your song builds and it ends on a climax, rather than it starts at low and then stays low and then ends.
And again, with the visuals, like there's something interesting there, but they're almost not confident enough to go too surreal with it. And animation lends itself to being surreal. You can do all sorts of interesting things. You can have the mice warp back to their countries of origins, but no, it has to be very it's almost a diegetic musical number. Like, this is all happening in universe and we can see it all. Whereas compare that to something like Surface Pressure from Encanto, where the visuals are very surreal and dreamlike, and it's cutting between. And yeah, it felt a bit music video-y, but you can do that stuff with animation, whereas this, it's just a bunch of mice dancing in a cargo hold, and it's quite depressing.
Even comparing it to The World's Greatest Criminal Minds, so from a Disney film that came out at the same time, more or less, and is also about mice dancing in a room. Watch those two sequences and you'll see that even that, which I think a lot of people would say is definitely a B-grade Disney song, you can see the difference in how it works. I do think one thing that this film is very guilty of is just scenes end by fading to black at the wrong time. And it happens all the time, and it always just feels weird in terms of pacing.
One thing I would like to talk about while we're talking about the boat is we have a return of my old favourite of Xeroxing for copying, animation cells copying animation onto the cells. Whereas in stuff like 101 Dalmatians, it was used to kind of just save time and no, we don't need to draw this again. We'll just copy it onto the animation cell and you can paint it from there. It cuts out an entire third of the process, basically. Here it's used in a really interesting way, where what they've done is they would record like physical objects. They'd filmed them and then frame by frame Xerox a copy of the film cell and just take out what they needed. So there are a lot of objects that have this sort of strange 3D quality to them because they just have lots of frames of animation that are taken from cells of filmed footage. So the boat itself is one of them. One that really stood in my mind and just immediately popped back to me when I saw it was the checkers board. And it's such a small detail, and they didn't need to do it that way, but they wanted this fluid movement, so that's what they went for. And there's some baskets later on that do it. I will say they stand out because that photocopying process leaves you with like a lot of like specks and kind of photocopy dust that just, it will never blend right, but you get this really interesting 3D effect from it.
And generally, I think the animation in this, whilst mixed, I think there is a cohesive style to what they've done. I know I was just complaining about that musical number not being stylized enough, but I think generally they've gone for like quite a gritty, grounded visual, similarly in terms of color palette and just like the overall tone in terms of light and shade. I think really works well. Like it feels gritty and it feels quite grounded. I don't necessarily think the script reflects that, but yeah. And the checkerboard in particular, I like to give credit where credit's due. Really just nice little inventive moment of the cargo hold gets partially flooded as they're kind of making their way across the ocean. So the checkerboard is being played by two people on opposite sides of the room. They make their move, and then the wave washes the board to the other side for the other person to make their move. I was like, that is very charming.
Talking of the cargo hold getting flooded, we sort of hit our inciting incident of the film, as if the anti-Semitic attack on a village isn't the inciting incident of the film. Where there's a big storm, and Fievel wants to see the fish, and so he throws his hat up as an excuse. He's like, yeah, I'm just going to go onto the deck and see the fish during a ridiculous storm. At which point I have no sympathy for him getting washed overboard.
You have no sympathy for a child being washed overboard on a boat because they act like a child. You are a cold-hearted man.
His dad did say, don't go up there.
This sequence is weird, and the reason I find it weird is I was reading up on it, and apparently it said Don Bluth wanted to put in sequences of wave demons trying to flood the ship and knocking Fievel overboard, and Steven Spielberg said that's too scary to go in a kids' film. Now, I don't know if I watched a different version of this film, but the version I watched definitely had wave demons in that attacked the ship and knocked Fievel overboard.
I think likely what's happened is that in showing the dailies to Steven Spielberg, is like, those aren't demons, those are wave monsters.
I've just drawn some waves. If you happen to see a face in them, that's on you, Steven. My note is, man, Cthulhu really wants Fievel dead.
Yeah, this is a really quite dramatic and scary scene. It's a bit too dramatic and scary, but I'll take it.
Again, it might sound like I've been really critical in the opening part of this podcast. I think that's just some general criticisms of the film, but just to be clear, like I think that grounded opening of a family having Hanukkah interrupted by an anti-Semitic attack, arriving in Germany to get on a huge steamer, making their way on there, this just grim journey where they've got almost nothing. Each of them's carrying like a single possession, and then the intensity of their boat almost being sank and, losing a child overboard. That is such a good first act for an immigrant story and a story about finding identity and opportunity in a new land. I think that is, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but I think that's exactly what this film needs in terms of an Act 1.
I'd say it probably is the perfect opening for an immigrant film. Hopefully the second two acts, follow up on that and are at least somewhat related to the immigrant story.
Oh, in that case, should we just skip the next two acts and just decide whether it's going on the list or not?
Well, the film seemed to want to skip the next two acts.
Eventually, the steamer arrives, and obviously, again, it's very much we've got the rescuers rules here, of we've got the human world going on, and then underneath that and in the background, we've got the animal/mouse world going on. So everyone gets off, and they're going through the sort of immigration office. Again, I think there's some really nice moments here. One is a human immigrant arrives, and they give their name. I can't remember what their exact name is, but it's clearly an Eastern European surname. And the officer just goes, "Okay, Mr. Smith." and stamps their card. And it's kind of a joke, but also, that's really what happened. It was like, we are taking away your name, we're taking away your identity, and we're anglicizing it or Americanizing it. That's a really good plot point and flavour element for a film about immigration.
Now, I couldn't find this, and I was wondering if you found it, but talking about the people, I have a sneaking suspicion that they filmed these scenes and then have rotoscoped it, because the people look weirdly uncanny. They're not the usual Don Bluth style of person. They very much feel like this has been filmed and then rotoscoped, and I love it as an effect.
I think it works really well, yeah. I think, again, it suits the tone of the film about it being more grounded, so, we don't have cartoony humans, they look normal.
Yeah, I wouldn't want it as the whole film. I don't want an animated film that is entirely... Well, they've done a few that are like rotoscoped animated films, and I'm sure they work, but it's not a children's animation, really, if you do that kind of thing. That's more like an art house kind of style, but it works so well as this kind of like surreal outside world to our story.
The only problem is watching it in 2022 is it feels like it's a Joel Haver sketch.
Yeah. We should mention as well, Fievel didn't die.
Yeah, my note here is, man, God really wants Fievel to live. The heavens open and light beams down, and there's this angelic chorus as Fievel makes it to America inside a bottle.
And when he reaches America, he's immediately greeted by Christopher Plummer, of all people.
When you say of all people, what you mean is of all pigeons.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I just think, like, don't get me wrong, I like Christopher Plummer, but why cast Christopher Plummer when he's just going to do an okay French accent? I suppose he's a very good singer and he can sing in an accent, which is what they've went for, because he has this weird bad little song about Never Say Never Again. Not the Bond film, but...
I think this is the best song in the film.
Oh, I didn't say it wasn't the best song in the film, I just said it's not good.
And I didn't say it was good either. Let's clarify there. Again, I'm still on board the film at this point, right? I think, so he sings a song about never saying never, and again, I think it's probably the most memorable song for me, musically it is anyway. And he's a pigeon, he's building the Statue of Liberty. I thought it was built by humans. He's definitely living the high life because he's got a hot water bottle he sleeps on, he wears a top hat, he seems to have 4 sexy French pigeons in his... harem. He's doing all right.
This scene also has one of my favourite things that keeps happening in animation, which is showing me an animal that doesn't need clothes, giving them clothes, and then taking them away. And it makes me incredibly uncomfortable to look at this small naked mouse.
Yeah, it's weird. Happens multiple times as well. I'm like, stop doing this to me, I don't like it.
So yeah, Henri Le Pigeon tells... What?
You just saying that, it sounds like we've made that name up. That's his name.
He tells Fievel, God, I almost forgot the protagonist's name. He tells Fievel, hey, if you want to find your family, they arrived by boat, they'll probably be here, go to immigration and we'll find them. So he flies him off to immigration, but not to like actual immigration, just sort of the vicinity. What I would call the main plot of this film is that Fievel's been separated from his family and he wants to find them. And what should have been the main plot is mice escaping the prejudice of cats in Europe and coming to America. But that's just kind of happening. And yeah, I feel like a lot of the points of the main plot just happened just because it's just coincidence or people didn't try hard enough, and it's kind of a bit annoying to me.
Yeah, the plot falls apart very, very quickly. I agree that should be the plot, but if we're going with the plot that Fievel has to find his family, for me, that should entail, this is a strange world to me. I have to learn about what being American is and how I adapt to that. So initially it should be, here's my Russian and Jewish heritage clashing against this American, presumably Christian heritage, or, whatever culture we're going for in New York. And I feel like the beat should be, there's a clash there, and he tries to lose his heritage and adopt this new one. That doesn't work either. And then the resolution and what he has to do to get back to his family involves finding a synthesis of those two identities, because that's what the immigrant experience, certainly at this time period in geography, is and was. And yeah, we don't really get any of that. It's just a lot of Fievel walking into dark rooms saying, Papa? Question mark. And also, just on a note, we keep coming back to the family periodically throughout the film. With the exception of Fievel's sister, they've all just given Fievel up for dead, which, to be fair, is actually reasonable. I kind of said that facetiously, but I think there's almost some sweet and bittersweet moments here where the sister's saying, he's out there, I believe it, and the parents are saying, that feeling will pass, because there's no reason to believe the mouse who's washed overboard is going to survive. And it's, again, I feel with just some slightly better voice direction, and if these dialogue scenes were dealt with better, these could be really heartbreaking, having parents trying to explain to their child, your sibling's gone, and we know you want to believe it, but it's not a realistic belief, but it doesn't really carry that weight.
No, it's tough to do because obviously in cinema we'll always have the dramatic irony of the audience knows that Fievel is okay, so we're like, why is no one believing her? And it's like, because he washed overboard, and in real life the situation would be trying to explain to a very young child that their brother is gone.
And I think in terms of pacing, probably what we need is at the midpoint of the film, we have that scene once, and she doesn't give up hope. And then at the end of the film, there's a nice payoff. I think we probably get too much of Fievel's family, because as you say, there's so many moments of Fievel's going one way and they're going the other, or Fievel's up on a stage, but there's someone tall in the way so they don't see him. I don't really know what that is adding to this story.
Again, to me, it feels like they're trying to tell this story of reuniting Fievel with his family, but they kind of rubber banded to this much better story of escaping the cats, because that's where all the drama really is. And they keep getting pulled back to it whenever, so they don't really have the space to do anything with Fievel being separated from his family. Like, he meets some new people on his adventure that, potentially a family, but he never spends enough time with any of them, really.
Let's dive into the middle act of this film then. So the sexy French pigeons drop Fievel off and immediately take him to probably the worst place they could probably take him to, which is Warren T. Rat, who is the villain of the piece, because when we meet him, he's smoking and counting money, and he's a rat. Or is he?
So I've said to you, Ben, that I think we need a kind of like mascot or like face image. We need a kind of mascot or image for this channel. To me, it's always been like, it's a play on Walt Disney, and Walt Disney has Mickey Mouse. We want like just some kind of gross rat as our kind of knockoff of Disney. And I realised that idea is based entirely on the character of Warren T. Rat. Yeah, he's just this kind of like sleazy con man who says he's going to take Fievel to his family and just kidnaps him and throws him with a load of other kidnapped, I'm presuming, children.
This sequence gets no time at all. It's almost disorientating, like how quickly things change here.
I don't want all narratives to be the same, but the reason a lot of narratives follow a similar structure is because it does help with the storytelling and it helps the audience follow along. We need a scene where actually Warren T. Rat and Fievel work together and they achieve something. It's we need the sausage stealing scene from Oliver and Company. And then Warren T. Rat's like, great, that now you're working for me in the cage. Or, in fact, there's the perfect example of that is the Pinocchio one. Like, hey, you've had the great show. You're riding on a high into the cage with you. Whereas this is just immediately like, oh, do you want to find your family? Great, follow me. They're in this cage.
It's implied to be a sweatshop. And I'm saying implied because he goes, right, you work here now. This huge beefy mouse comes over and says, right, get back to work. No one tells him what work is. And I was like, presumably it's going to be 5 minutes of like him doing this job and it's horrible, and again it's sort of a comment on the exploitation of immigrant workers. We don't see him work at all. We just cut to him that night and he escapes immediately, and that's it. That's the whole sweatshop scene done. Again, it was a sequence that was cut for time, but it's just confusing.
We're also introduced to another child mouse, Tony or something. I don't know. I just find it very okay.
You mean Tony to Pony?
Is that the character's name?
That is the character's name.
Well, that's excellent, and he's instantly gone up a bit in my standing, at least until the next scene, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, my notes just kind of fall apart a bit here because...
It's because the film kind of just falls apart a bit here.
There's so many, 1 minute scenes, and again, it feels like it's sort of going for, an Odyssey journey thing, but, none of them are given enough time. And again, I'd rather have 3 medium-length to long-length scenes where we get a clear sort of purpose of that scene happening, rather than just... The purpose of all these scenes seem to be, Fievel's out of his depth, this is a strange new world, and things are scary and difficult. And they all just seem to be saying that. He kind of goes past a school who are giving the Pledge of Allegiance, which is weird. Not really that moment, just the Pledge of Allegiance is weird. I don't know why they make children do it. At one point, Fievel gate crashes a brothel. It's just odd. Physically, so much of Fievel's movement is literally just him like being sloshed around in water or fired out of something or falling over something. It doesn't feel like he's driving anything. Things are just happening to him.
You've kind of hit the nail on the head with the sort of attempt at an Odyssey thing, and thinking about it, I realise what I actually just want here is Pinocchio, where if you're going to go for Fievel being separated from his family, it needs to be clear acts and clear progression of he'll meet someone and it goes wrong, he'll meet someone else and it goes wrong, he'll go somewhere else and it goes wrong, eventually being reunited with his family. Instead, he's kind of just flitting about all over the place and he's kind of just living on the same streets as his family, but because he's just faffing about with all these other people, he just never bumps into them.
He does try, though, so he...
Does he?
After trying to go out on his own, he eventually bumps back into Tony Toponi, and they decide to go down the market, where they meet a young... Okay, the person's doing what I think they think is an Irish accent. I really hope it's not an Irish voice actor, but it doesn't sound like a good Irish accent. And Tony Toponi has a love subplot, so there's like a romance subplot between these two characters. So he sees her and he's just like, wow, she's really hot. And then 30 seconds later he goes up and they kiss, and that's the end of that subplot. They fall in love. They
don't just kiss, they do the Don Bluth face at each other as well.
If you want a sexy mouse staring directly into the camera at you, you've come to the right film for 10 seconds.
Oh, there's a cat attack here, isn't there, as well? Which, again, visually is very interesting. It's quite scary. The use of lighting on it's just very nice. Basically the lighting we had in The Secret of NIMH, where everything's in shadow with like red flare all over it. Oh, and Fievel almost gets eaten as well, which is quite a nice little moment, because I was like, oh. Just from an animation point of view, it's quite nice. We see, he goes inside the cat and then he's climbing his way out and fights his way out, and suddenly we've revealed, oh, actually there are cats in America. That song was a lie.
There are some cats in America.
Which, again, I feel this film needs to pick a lane and stick to it. And I do quite like the immigrants escaping prejudice and persecution, and they get to America and, oh, actually that prejudice and persecution is still here. But in order for that to work, you can't really separate Fievel from his family. That has to be the main focus.
So for me, I don't really feel like, other than context, the cats actually represent that oppression, whether that's anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-Semitism or just a general theme of oppression, whatever they're meant to represent. Because all they represent to me is cats, and what I mean by that is they're cats and they want to eat mice, which is what cats do, certainly in the world of cartoons. But I think for that link to be strong, it should be, for example, this is the nice place to live, where the animals live, and the cats own it completely. So the mice have to live in the corners or in squalor or whatever. Or the cats are, making the mice pay protection money or service money or whatever. And if they don't, the mice get eaten. There's something a bit more analogous to the human experience, because it's a bit too literal. Like,
yes,
immigrants going across to America in 1885, the problem wasn't that there were more Cossacks waiting to kill them. The problems were more complex, but the themes were the same, and that's, I think, what this just completely misses.
Yeah, and again, I think there was supposed to be more here, because the whole point of Warranty Rat is he kind of is extorting the mice. He's telling them he can protect them from the cats, because he can, and, profiting off that, and that needs to be clear, and there needs to be more there. I feel it could work, but because we don't devote enough time to it, it just doesn't work, is the problem.
I kind of didn't really get until the end of the film that that's what Warranty Rat's thing was meant to be, is that he's that middleman and he's kind of blackmailing and taking advantage of the mice. All I got was he really wanted money, and again, he should turn up in this scene. It should be after the cats have had their fun and done whatever. Then he should be showing up and they're saying, you're not doing your job to protect us. And he's like, well, you need to give me more money. Because if he's the villain of the piece and he represents that, he should be in the bloody film for more than 2 scenes.
But that would require cutting one of the several scenes of Fievel going, Papa, and the Papa just walking past without seeing him. And we need all 7 of those.
Spend more time in the brothel. I was interested then. So after the cats have gone, Fievel, Tony, and his new beau, Bridget, decide to go see Honest John.
Different Honest John.
Yeah, I was like, come on. If you've gone for a dark, visually disturbing Odyssey film about childhood innocence and a very young character trying to get back to their family, don't put a character called Honest John in as well. You're just asking for trouble. And Honest John, there's a nugget of a good idea here. He's only interested in the mice who are registered to vote because all he cares about is taking advantage of populist policies with the immigrants to get political power, which again is based on history and reality and is really interesting. And he's mostly just a joke character. In fact, as far as I can tell, the 4 Irish characters in this film, again, there's some problems with stereotypes here because what they are is a police officer, an outspoken young lassie, an alcoholic, and a dead Catholic. That's not cool.
And that's just Honest John. Yeah, again, if anything was given the room to breathe, I feel this could work of like, okay, well, you know, I've tried the swindler, he couldn't help me find my family. I've tried the fellow escaped sweatshop workers, they couldn't help me. I'm going to go to the local politician, he can't help me. And it should follow that structure, but it feels like it's trying to, but failing.
We also get introduced to another character who's like a wealthy mouse, and she's saying we need to do something about these cats. So her and Honest John agree to team up and get all the rich mice and all the poor mice together to stand up and have some kind of rally against the cats. Again, I don't really feel this gels with the theme, because I guess there were wealthy immigrants, but that feels at odds with what this story's meant to be about. So yeah, I don't think it's the right call. But yeah, anyway, they gather up, and then there's a subplot of the mice are kind of gathering together to stand up the cats, and that's going to be what I thought was going to be the finale of the film. It's not, but it's near the end of the film, certainly.
So with renewed hope that... Why is he hopeful, actually? I was going to say, so with renewed hope that he's going to find his family again. Like, it seems like he's not looking for his family anymore. He's now just sort of involved in this political story about getting rid of the cats. But I guess that's somehow going to help him find his family, which, you know, if he'd waited about a couple of seconds, as in all the other scenes, it would have. Fievel's now hopeful, but also, you know, he's alone and he's sad, and he sings a song about it. Or rather, he attempts to sing a song about it.
This song is so bad. And I can't tell you whether there's a good version of this song or not, but they've taken 2 child voice actors, one who can't really act or sing, one that really can't act or sing, and they've given them a ballad duet, and it's awful. I think there's a really clear fix certainly to this song, maybe to some of the other songs as well.
Which is to cut it.
I was going to not quite go as far and go down the Rescuers route and have them be non-diegetics, have them be songs that play over the top. I think that would work absolutely fine here. If Fievel was a silent character, having this sad duet play and, you know, one part sing over his visuals, another part sing over his sisters, and then them come together, I think would do a really good job of communicating the connection between these 2 characters. I don't think the scene is intrinsically problematic, but the performance on the song is so poor, it's impossible to have any enjoyment during it.
This song is weirdly beloved. Maybe it's just, it's entirely just nostalgia, but people just love this song, and it pops up in like popular culture all the time. My favourite example of this so far that I've seen is, are you familiar with the South Park episode Eek a Penis? Where, explicit discussion here, but Garrison wants to reattach a penis after a gender reassignment surgery, and it's gone. So they have to grow a new one, and, you know, you can grow, you know, ears and stuff on mice, so they grow a penis on this mouse, and this mouse runs away, and they have to try and find it. And there's one scene where the mouse stops on top of a fence, looks up at the moon and sings this song, and then obviously the penis joins in with the duet part. I'm also sorry to say, Ben, that you've missed out on your 10 points.
Damn it, I was going to say this scene. I was going to say this at the start and I forgot to mention it. Damn it.
Well, I'll give you a bonus 2 points if you can tell me the exact moment that I had to turn it off.
Is it when they started singing together?
No, it was Fievel's first high note that he just miserably fails to make.
Yeah. No, I knew it must have been this bloody song. I can see why, if you watch this as a young child, it probably has a lot of nostalgia. Obviously, I'm coming in as a cynical adult who's got no history with this film, so it's easy for me just to dismiss it. And when you're very young, you know at a basic level what good and bad sounds like in terms of music and singing, but probably this, when you're a 5-year-old, you hear 5-year-olds singing all the time, so you know your quality radar hasn't developed yet. But yeah, man, as I say, there's probably a good version of this song, but it's not the version that happens to be in this film.
When you're young, not knowing the difference or not knowing what is good and what is bad just sums up so much of animation made for children, where they're just like, it doesn't matter, it will entertain them, and I think it's sweet, therefore children will enjoy it. So after our song, we actually go to the rally, where for some reason Fievel is like, a big part of this rally. He's kind of sat at the back. He's on stage for some reason, and his parents can't see the stage. And if they could only see... That's why he's on stage. He's on stage so we can have the dramatic irony of his parents being like, I can't see the stage.
I hope there's no one important on it.
And this was the first moment in this film where I thought, are the people in this world aware of the mice? Could you imagine walking through Central Park and you see what is basically a mouse rally with like signs and placards and everything?
If I was walking through Central Park and saw that, I'd assume it was an advert for Professor Screw Eyes' Circus.
Can Professor Screw Eyes' Circus be where the films that don't make the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics go?
Yes, I 100% agree with that. That's an excellent idea. And I feel really bad about the ones that made it onto the back of the list, because my God, it's ascended into purity as a defined classic, or going to Professor Screw Eyes' Circus.
A place where people can just enjoy themselves, much to the judgment of children and a crazy time traveller.
I'm so sorry, The Emperor's New Groove. You deserved better.
This scene ends in such a weird way where they're like, we've got to do something about the cats. And then Fievel's like, I've got an idea. And he whispers his idea. And now that you know what his idea actually is, would you care to comment on where did this come from?
So his idea is, spoiler warning, is to make a giant mechanistic version of the giant mouse of Minsk, which is a story his dad tells him right at the start of the film.
Oh my God, I forgot that's where it comes from.
It's actually quite well signposted.
No, it's signposted.
Okay, fair point. It is signposted, maybe not quite well. In principle, I absolutely adore this as the climax to the film. Because what we get is, as I say, it gets signposted at the start of the film, Fievel brings it up here, and then it's used to overthrow the cats. And they recognise it. They go, oh no, it's the giant mouse of Minsk. But in terms of an immigrant story, the way you build your identity and carve out an element of your culture in a foreign land and a foreign culture is through storytelling, and it's bringing the stories from your motherland into this new world, which is literally what they're doing. I don't think that thematically is brought through enough, but the idea of the characters using their stories as their way of overcoming that oppression, I think, is beautiful. It's just a shame I don't think the execution lands it.
I actually think the execution on the finale itself is fine. And I know we're kind of skipping to the finale here, but honestly, we'll briefly touch on what happens between, but not much, basically. And I actually think the execution of that is fine, but the problem is that the second act doesn't fit. So we've got this first act and final act of this immigrant story, and then in the second act is just Fievel faffing about because he's been separated from his family and doing a Pinocchio, and it doesn't fit. And I feel you could have signposted a lot more of this stuff in an actual second act that fits in the story.
Absolutely. And again, if we consider the idea that this second act is maybe the cats have a story, or the rat, or he's not actually a rat, but the villain of the piece is I know, the villain of the piece is telling this story about, if you don't do what I say, this bad thing's going to happen to you, and they're using storytelling as an oppressive device, then having storytelling as a liberating device at the finale is a really good parallel and counterpoint to that. But yeah, it's too disconnected. Yeah, we get the seed right at the start and then the finale, and nothing in the middle connects to storytelling, either as a theme or just in general storytelling terms within a narrative film.
So before we get to the giant mouse of Minsk, the big finale, we've just had our rally. What the hell happens next? I know we somehow end up with Dom DeLuise for an awful musical number, but how did we even get there?
Okay, so all the mice go down to the docks for a good time. No, they go in this old, abandoned curios museum, and that's where they're going to build the giant mouse of Minsk. So all the mice are going down there. Tony and Fievel are running late, so they run down there, and Fievel gets distracted by he hears a violin in a sewer and climbs down because he thinks it's his father. Just on a side note, when we're establishing this dockside scene, we get a wide shot of a boat that's called the Hong Kong Queen or something. It's a boat that's got Hong Kong in the title. And we just get a very nice, old-fashioned, offensive piece of piano music going dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Again, for a film that's meant to be about, isn't multiculturalism great? Stop being racist.
I remember all this now, and there's another really nice little moment, which is when the mice are going into the museum. First of all, the lighting effect, the animation in this film, I know we said, but the animation in this film is genuinely beautiful most of the time, quite frankly. And we get this nice little moment where the mice are, rather than torches, they have birthday candles. And it's that point I made during our Rescuers discussion, which is I want more of that from these. If you have this society of mice and they have like their own tools and they make their own clothes, everything should be miniaturized and it should make sense. When you mix the two, it doesn't quite work, and I'd rather have the other version. I'd rather basically mice be borrowers. I think that works much nicer in those moments where like, oh, they're using a big button as something. Don't know what it'd use it as, but you know, it's this tiny thing for us is a huge object for them, and they use it for like, oh, a wheel on a car or whatever. Those moments I really like, and we only get a few of those in this film, and one of them is the candles, and then the other is sort of like the basket, where they use baskets for moving things about. But just a nice little moment that I liked, but wish there was more of. Anyway, Fievel goes into the drain. He ends up stumbling on the cats from earlier, who again, I keep forget. Like if they're not on screen, I just forget about them. I'm not sure if that's just a problem with my own object permanence at this point, but I was just like, oh yeah, the cats. And oh look, Warranty Rat is with the cats. I'd forgotten entirely about him.
I honestly didn't think he was going to show up again. I thought he was like, this is a dodgy character, but fortunately, Fievel's found his way out, and I was like, oh, this is meant to be the villain. Again, has real Secret of Nim problems, where the villain, either don't do a villain and just have, this group or this concept as the bad part of the film, or give your villain more time. Don't do neither. So Fievel discovers that Warranty Rat, lo and behold, is actually a cat in disguise for reasons I don't really understand. Is it meant to be that the only way he can get money is pretending to be a rat and being the go-between between the cats? But I don't see how that's more beneficial than being, I'm a cat, give me your money or I'll eat you. Again,
it's just that it's not set up like this is the reveal of a different second act.
Yes.
I've just realised what this film is. Do you know that game you would play where you'd all get bits of paper and you'd write the start of a story, then you'd fold it and you'd pass it on. They'd write their middle section of their story and then you'd fold it and pass it on, and then you get the conclusion. And then everyone unfolds it and you just get these stupid stories because you've got 3 stories cut up and like interchanged with each other. I'm assuming that's what happened with this script, where someone wrote the first and they're like, oh, we're doing this story about immigrant mice coming to America. They're going to represent the Jewish people of Europe fleeing for a better life in America. I've written the first and final act, but I can't figure out what's going in the middle. Could you just fill it in? And they just wrote a completely different story in the middle.
That's exactly it. Yeah. You're absolutely right, because again, there's good nuggets of ideas here, there's good little moments, there's good lines, but it's not a cohesive whole, and it's often the good stuff is working against other good stuff. But don't worry, Liam, because Dom DeLuise shows up.
This is the perfect amount of Dom DeLuise in a film. Well, no, it's the perfect amount of Dom DeLuise in a film is no Dom DeLuise, but if you're going to have him in your film, like having him for one scene and a musical number, I can live with that.
I've been quite harsh on him. I actually think this character's fine. I think it's a fun character. I think thematically, if we're going with like all cats are bad, but being like, actually, there's a good one, and like maybe you've been a little bit judgmental, audience member, assuming all cats are bad. And then you go, well, I didn't assume that, you just told me that, and you're the one who keeps using racial and national stereotypes. And the film says, shut up, here's a song.
This also does make the whole cats for anti-Semites fall a bit flat as well. All anti-Semites are bad, except for this one. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. No?
On a side note, this has the only joke in the film I think is actually funny, which is Dom DeLuise's character Tiger, who he's just an idiot cat, but he's huge. That's his character trait. He says, Fievel's saying, oh, he lost his family, and he says, oh, I lost my family too. 8 brothers, 10 sisters, and 3 fathers. That's a good line. It's a genuinely good joke.
And I will say, actually, like, this isn't me backtracking, but I think of all the Dom DeLuise characters we're going to meet over the Don Bluth filmography, this is probably the one that works the best. Like, the character design and the voice fits quite well. And, you know, he is just this big softy, and that works. I still don't really think it needs to be in the film. I feel the way about a lot of this film, quite frankly. The musical number definitely doesn't need to be, because it's the musical number. Basically, they sing like, hey, we're 2 individuals who have always been, we're actually each one half of a duo, and we go together and we pair up. But I'm just like, you've only just met, and I don't really get that impression from your interaction. This feels like it follows more adventure.
It's in the wrong part of the film. This kind of buddy song should be at the start of your second act. The main character's lost someone important to them, or they've set out on a journey or whatever, and then they meet this other person. They go, hey, we've got a lot in common. Then the second act is them going on adventure. That second act ends with tension between them and their partners, and the third act is the 2 of them coming together to overcome whatever problem. But you can't introduce the character for that journey at the end of the second act. That's too late.
They escape, right, and then they head back to the docks, which is slightly too early to set off the secret weapon, but they have to do it anyway because the cats are coming. And there's this nice, I actually think I think the finale just works. From this point, everything is actually quite good. Well, everything in that finale, the actual Fievel reuniting with his family, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that still needs to happen and get resolved. There's this sort of confrontation between the mice and the cats and the mediator of Warranty Rat, and I like it. Again, it feels like it's referencing extortion that we never saw took place. I think there's quite a nice line here where he has his nose and ears knocked off, and they're like, he's a cat, and his response is, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Which is quite a good line.
I mean, you've already said it perfectly, but this would be so much better if this character had been in the middle act and we'd seen this sort of behaviour before and it had worked for him. I think the pacing of it's really good. We get this drama of they've let the secret weapon go, and Honest John's desperately trying to stop it because he's saying, no, it needs to be at this exact time. And then it does need to go and it's not, and Fievel runs in. Again, this is like Fievel actually doing something to drive the plot forward. He's the one who thinks to use fire to burn through the rope, and it releases the giant mouse of Minsk. All the cats are terrified and get scattered into the ocean. They go, they can't swim. And I was like, oh, have they just killed all the cats? Man, that's pretty heavy. But no, the cats have to cling onto an anchor on the Hong Kong boat, which raises up. The cats have been driven out of New York, and they say, oh, well, at least there's going to be mice in Hong Kong. And I was like, wait, so the climax of your immigration story is if there's bad people in your country, send them abroad and it's China's problem. That feels so antithetical to what I think you're trying to say, but then again, I don't really understand what the theme of this film is.
On the note of the giant mouse of Minsk, it is terrifying.
Oh, it looks awesome. In fact, it has real Five Nights at Freddy's vibes. Yeah, the animation work on it's superb, and I think the whole design of it's excellent. I really like it. I think it does a really good job.
I really wonder, because this is around the time where early Pixar was developing and we were starting to introduce that 3D technology. So obviously we saw that in the clock tower scene in Basel, where that was one of that company's, I can't remember, was it Pixar at that stage? But like the 3D technology, and they were doing like 3D environments, kind of replaced this Xeroxing. And I wonder if we'd stuck with that kind of, can you film something and rotoscope over it basically to get fluid 3D movement in a 2D space, what would that look like these days? Because I think the animation on this mouse is just beautiful. Obviously it's a bit scratchy, but the effect is gorgeous. I also enjoy that Fievel dies here. The cinematic language here is that Fievel lights the fire, is knocked back, and basically dies, which, again, if he wasn't separated from his family, that could be, the conclusion. They find him after the battle and are like, oh no, and then, oh no, he is okay. Instead, the drama that needs to be resolved here is he's still separated from his family, so they don't really work together. So what they have to do is, after the battle, they just wash him away into somewhere called Orphan Alley.
This serves no purpose.
I mean, it does. It serves the purpose of telling us there's somewhere in New York called Orphan Alley, and it's, once again, the Scar situation of, is that just where the orphans flocked, or is it named that because of that?
Again, this feels like this scene should take place before the finale of the film, because this is the point where Fievel finally gives up for a bit. Some kids, I can't tell, maybe I'm a sociopath, I can't tell if these kids are bullying him or they're being hard, but they're trying to be like, look, this is the world we live in. I can't tell.
All I could think when looking at these mice children was, is one of those mice supposed to be bald? And it was just bothering me.
They're all the mice that have given up on finding their family, and Fievel kind of says, oh, they're never going to come back to me, and then he starts crying and misses his family. And then they show up, and all the other crazy... No, that's not true. Some of the other crazy characters met along the way are there. Don Deluise is there, but Honest John isn't, but then the Snooty Mouse is. Fine. I felt nothing when Fievel's finally reunited with his family, and I feel this should be the emotional heart of the film.
Yeah, it's very functional, and again, we're trying to resolve two separate stories here, and we're not really giving enough time to either of them. But they're reunited, and then we flash forward a bit because the Statue of Liberty is complete. Let's go see the Statue of Liberty, because apparently the theme of this was, America, land of opportunity, and then it just sort of ends. Oh no, wait, the Statue of Liberty blinks. And then it ends. Blinks, winks. It would be very weird if the Statue of Liberty just blinked for no reason. Like, at least a wink has a meaning behind it.
I laughed so hard at this. The ending is so heavy-handed, right? So the pigeons fly all the characters out to see the finished Statue of Liberty, because it was indeed built by pigeons, apparently. And it's so like, this is America. We have told an American story. And I don't feel they have. Like, I haven't really got an idea of what America looks like or American culture. This hasn't been a story of people finding out what America is, and that I feel that this should be the moment where they go, there's all these people from different places and they've come together to create America. That's not really what we get. So I was like, this is just such a heavy-handed ending. And I was already like, this is so ridiculous and over the top. And then the Statue of Liberty winks at us. And I was like, what is this? I wish it was a joke, but I think it's sincere.
And that is one of the most beloved Don Bluth films in existence.
Well, Liam, before we pass final judgments on An American Tail, is there anything else we need to discuss regarding this film?
There is just one thing before we can cast this film into the depths of Professor Screw Eyes' circus. We have to decide which character we believe is the sexiest character in An American Tail. As always, we're referring to characters that we believe are either inappropriately or unnecessarily sexualized for an animation predominantly aimed at very young children, which in this case feels very appropriate. I know we often talk about family films can be watched by anyone. I feel this is a film for very young children, despite its dark themes of anti-Semitism and never being able to escape prejudice. So Ben, which character in An American Tail do you think is the sexiest, and why is it the mouse whose name I've forgotten?
Do you mean Bridget the Irish mouse?
Quite possibly.
She's certainly the one who gets the longing Don Bluth sexy mouse looking into camera shot. So I think there's certainly a case for it, but I'm just going down the line, Liam, and I'm going for sexy French pigeons. I think it's the Bimbette thing of they may all look the same, but for some reason there being multiples of them just amplifies it. So yep, sexy French pigeons to me.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether it was going to be the mouse or the 4 pigeons. I'm going to take a slightly different track and say I think the sexiest character is the completed Statue of Liberty, because I love freedom and freedom winked at me. Yeah, we need to retrieve the scroll. How are we doing it? Yeah, how are we doing it?
So, with the sexiest character decided, we need to decide whether American Tail is worthy of going on the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. To do that, we must retrieve the scroll. So I'm going to just find myself in Hamburg. I'm going to get on a boat and sail across to America. I'm going to survive Cthulhu and God fighting over my immortal soul. Then I'm going to faff around a bit and just sort of find it somewhere at the docks. So, Liam, I've taken out my grimy, gritty pen. I've just finished doodling a sexy mouse on a spare piece of paper. Am I writing an American Tale on the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics?
I was really excited to revisit this film because, for the most part, I do actually really like Don Bluth. I think I've got a lot of affection for the work he did at Disney and sort of the influence he had on animation. And some of his later films I have a lot of love for, but it's been a long time since I've seen them, actually. So maybe I'm now suddenly a bit worried because I think this film is a mess. I didn't realise how messy it was until watching it. That said, discussing it, I think that opening act and the finale for that opening act are very strong, but they just don't have the support of the rest of the film. I think ultimately the film should have picked a lane. The biggest mistake is separating Fievel from his family, but I understand that, weirdly enough, that's what most people associate this film with. Oh, it's a story about a mouse trying to find his family after getting lost from them. So clearly that resonated with a lot of people, but that's not really what the film should be about. Or at least if it is going to be about that, don't set up and pay off the Coming to America story, which could have been so much better. And of the two stories they presented, was the better story. So for me, this is way too messy to make a list. So I want to condemn this to the pits of Dr. Screw Eyes' eccentric circus.
Well, I've talked at length in this podcast about a lot of the stuff you've just touched on in terms of plotting and structure, and I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I think fundamentally, if you're going to call your film an American Tale, you need to really focus on the theme of Americanism. And again, I think that's so strong in that first act. There are no cats in America, this impossible ideal that as an audience we know can't be true. And then just losing that all so rapidly is really disappointing. I've talked about some of the more minor issues, but I think there's so much good stuff in here. It's really hard to just completely condemn it. It's one of those films where I think there will probably be people listening to this podcast who, much like yourself, Liam, they watched it when they were young and they've got fond memories of it and maybe some scary memories or some real strong emotions. This part was sad, this part was scary, this part was, dark and unusual or whatever. And since I came to it afresh and didn't have any of those memories, it's really hard for me to assess that. We've talked in this podcast before about how hard it is to assess films that are aimed at very young audiences because they rarely have anything for adults compared to, slightly older films. But I have to remind myself that, there are films that I do have that nostalgia for that we've talked about on this podcast, films like Lady and the Tramp or 101 Dalmatians or The Aristocats, which I do have that nostalgia for, and I don't see them as holding up in the cold light of day. And I think An American Tale is one of those. For people who fall into that nostalgic camp, go and watch it again and see how you still feel about it. But hey, as always, there's nothing wrong with loving this film. This isn't one of those films where I watch it and think, how could anyone love this film? This isn't We're Back, a Dinosaur Story, okay? There is good stuff in this film. That said, I'm going to send it to Professor Screw Eyes' eccentric circus. So, it can be enjoyed by the freaks.
This poor 6-year-old naked mouse. Well, occasionally naked mouse. And with that, not only does An American Tale not make the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics, it is the first inductee to Professor Screw Eyes' eccentric circus, with many of our previous discussions being expedited on delivery to join it. Don't worry, Oliver and Company will be coming for you. An American Tale. You won't be the only film starring Dom DeLuise to be in that circus. In fact, I imagine many films starring Dom DeLuise are going to be joining you.
Before we wrap up, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics is available on SoundCloud, Spotify, a selection of other podcast hosting platforms, as well as a video version on YouTube where we also post memes, interviews, edits, and a bunch of other random content about animated films. And of course, there are always more animated films to talk about. So Liam, which film are we looking at next time?
Following a pattern of watching Don Bluth films that I watched lots as a child but haven't watched since I was about 5, we're looking at The Land Before Time, which I am now terrified to revisit. However, from my memory, this may well be the first and, frankly, only dinosaur film that's ever going to make this list.
Until we completely run out and we do all billion of the Land Before Time sequels.
To be fair, a couple of those sequels I'm very fond of, and I watched post being 5, which I'm not ashamed of. With that, all that's left to say once again is thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate it. And remember to give The Land Before Time a watch and join us next time for Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics.